The massive doors of Training Bay 7 slid open with a soft hiss, revealing a room filled with the strangest collection of beings James had ever seen. He stepped inside, his boots clicking against the metal floor, and tried not to stare at his new classmates. A creature that looked like it was made entirely of blue crystal sat in the front row, its body glowing softly in the dim light. Next to it, something that resembled a giant mantis was cleaning its antenna with delicate movements. In the corner, a blob of purple gas floated inside what appeared to be a glass suit, shifting colors like a living rainbow. James clutched his datapad tighter and found an empty seat near the back. Every eye, sensor, and appendage in the room seemed to follow his movement. He had expected this. After all, he was the first human to ever attend the Galactic Medical Academy. "Welcome, students, to Advanced Trauma Medicine," announced Dr. Veltara as she entered the room. She was tall and elegant, her crystal body reflecting the overhead lights like a prism. When she spoke, her voice came through the universal translator as smooth and professional. "This semester, you will learn to save lives under the most difficult conditions." A student near the front raised what James assumed was a hand, though it looked more like a tentacle. "Doctor, what about the human? Should we not be more careful with our studies? I have heard they are very breakable." Several other students made sounds that the translator interpreted as murmurs of agreement. James felt his cheeks grow warm. Ever since arriving at the station 3 weeks ago, everyone treated him like he might shatter at any moment. Dr. Veltara's glow dimmed slightly. "Yes, that is an important point. Humans are indeed one of the more fragile species in our galaxy. Their bones break easily, their skin tears with minimal pressure, and they cannot survive in most environments without artificial support." She turned toward James. "Mr. Thompson, perhaps you could tell us about some of the limitations of your species." James stood up slowly, feeling dozens of alien eyes watching him. "Well," he began, "I guess we are pretty soft compared to most of you. We need oxygen to breathe, we can only survive in a narrow temperature range, and we bruise if you hit us too hard." The gas creature, who had introduced herself as Nim during orientation, pulsed a worried yellow color. "How did your species ever survive long enough to reach space?" she asked through her translator. "Good question," James said with a small smile. "I suppose we are just stubborn." Dr. Veltara moved to the center of the room. "This brings up an important point for today's lesson. Each species has evolved different ways to handle injury and trauma. What might be fatal to one species could be minor to another." She gestured toward a student who looked like a walking tree. "Groot's people can regrow entire limbs given enough time and nutrients." The tree-like being nodded his massive head. "My grandfather once regrew his entire torso after a mining accident. Took 3 seasons, but he was good as new." "Fascinating," Dr. Veltara continued. "And Kira's aquatic species has redundant organs throughout their body." She pointed to the fish-like student in the third row. "They can lose significant portions of their internal systems and continue functioning." Kira's gills fluttered as she spoke. "My cousin survived having 60% of her liver destroyed by toxic algae. The backup systems kept her alive until it regenerated." James listened with growing interest. He had studied some alien biology before coming here, but hearing about it directly was much more impressive. "What about humans?" asked Borak, the insect-like student. His compound eyes reflected the light as he turned toward James. "What special abilities do they possess?" James felt all attention focus on him again. Well, we heal pretty fast, I guess. And we can handle a lot of pain before we pass out." Several students made sounds that seemed skeptical. "Pain tolerance?" Dr. Veltara asked. "Please explain." "Well, humans have been known to walk on broken legs, or keep fighting even when badly injured," James said. "During our wars, soldiers would sometimes continue fighting even after losing limbs." The room fell silent. Even Dr. Veltara's glow seemed to flicker. "You continue functioning after losing limbs?" Nim asked, her gaseous form turning a shocked orange color. "Sometimes, for a short while," James admitted. "Adrenaline helps. It is a chemical our bodies produce during stress." Borak's antenna twitched rapidly. "This adrenaline, it prevents death." "Not exactly," James explained. "It just helps us ignore pain and keep moving when we need to. But we still bleed and die like anyone else." Dr. Veltara made a note on her datapad. "Interesting. We will need to study this further." She looked around the room. "Today, we will begin with basic trauma assessment. You will work in pairs to identify and treat various injuries using holographic patients." As the students began pairing off, James noticed that most of the aliens seemed nervous about working with him. Finally, Kira swam over in her mobility chair. "Would you like to be partners?" she asked. "I promise to be gentle." James smiled. "I would like that. And do not worry about being gentle. I am tougher than I look." Kira's translator made a sound like laughter. "We shall see, James Thompson. We shall see." The simulation chamber hummed to life around them, creating the perfect replica of a damaged space freighter. Sparks flew from broken control panels, emergency lights flashed red and orange, and the artificial gravity generator made concerning grinding noises every few seconds. James walked carefully beside Kira, who moved through the mock disaster scene in her specialized mobility chair. The chair's anti-gravity system kept her suspended in a bubble of water, allowing her to function outside her natural environment. Her large, dark eyes scanned the area nervously. "I do not like this," she whispered, her gills fluttering with anxiety. "The gravity feels wrong here. Very unstable." James nodded, checking his medical scanner. Their assignment was simple enough: locate and treat 3 holographic casualties scattered throughout the wreckage. The holograms would respond like real patients from different alien species, complete with appropriate injuries and vital signs. "There," James pointed to a flickering blue form near the far wall. "Looks like our first patient." They moved toward the hologram together, stepping over twisted metal and avoiding the shower of sparks from a damaged power coupling. The gravity generator's grinding grew louder as they walked, making the floor vibrate under their feet. Behind them, other student pairs worked on their own scenarios. James could hear Nim discussing treatment options with her partner, her gaseous form glowing bright green with concentration. Borak was clicking rapidly at his holographic patient, using his species' natural echolocation to assess internal damage. "The readings are very strange," Kira said, studying her scanner as they approached their patient. The holographic being appeared to be from a silicon-based species, its rocky exterior showing several deep cracks. "I think we need to stabilize the fractures before." The gravity generator suddenly let out a loud bang, followed by a high-pitched whine. The artificial gravity field fluctuated wildly, dropping to almost nothing for a moment before surging back to double normal strength. "Warning, warning," announced the computer system. "Gravity field instability detected. Please evacuate training area." But the warning came too late. The sudden gravity surge caught James off balance as he was reaching for a medical tool from his kit. The force yanked him sideways and sent him tumbling toward a jagged piece of mock debris, a sharp metal panel that had been designed to look like part of the damaged ship's hull. James tried to catch himself, but his momentum was too great. His left arm struck the metal edge first, and the sharp surface sliced through his uniform and deep into the flesh of his forearm. Pain shot up his arm as blood immediately began flowing from the wound. The cut was about 6 inches long and deep enough that James could see the white of underlying tissue through the red. "Oh no, oh no, oh no!" Kira screamed, her translator turning her distress call into a piercing alarm sound. She abandoned her patient and rushed toward James, her mobility chair spinning in tight circles. "Emergency! Emergency! Human is dying!" The sound of her panic brought other students running. Borak arrived first, his compound eyes taking in the scene. When he saw the blood running down James's arm and dripping onto the floor, he began making rapid clicking sounds, his species equivalent of screaming. "So much blood." Borak clicked frantically. "Look how much vital fluid he has lost already. This is a catastrophic injury." Nim floated over quickly, her gaseous form shifting from green to deep red, the color her people used to show mourning and grief. "Is he dying? Should I record his final words for his family?" More students gathered around, each reacting with horror at the sight of James bleeding. A student who looked like a walking cactus began swaying back and forth, producing low moaning sounds. Another who resembled a large bird started plucking at her own feathers in distress. "Someone get Dr. Veltara," shouted a student from across the room. "The human is hemorrhaging." "So much blood," whispered another. "I have never seen anything like this." Kira was practically hyperventilating, her gills working overtime. "James? James? Can you hear me? Stay with us. Do not go toward the light." The gravity field continued to fluctuate, making standing difficult, but the students seemed too focused on James's injury to notice. Several of them had pulled out recording devices to document what they apparently thought were his final moments. "This is terrible," Borak clicked mournfully. "He was so young. So full of life." "What do we do?" asked Nim, her form now pulsing between red and black. I have never seen this much fluid loss in a living being. One student who looked like a giant slug was already preparing what appeared to be funeral preparations, spreading some kind of ceremonial powder on the ground around James. The blood continued to flow from the cut, soaking through the makeshift pressure bandage James had created using part of his torn uniform sleeve. To the alien students, who came from species where any significant fluid loss meant imminent death, the scene looked like a medical catastrophe. Why is no one helping him? Kira wailed. We are medical students. We should know what to do. There is nothing to do, Borak replied sadly. No being can survive this level of trauma. We should make him comfortable in his final moments. The alarm systems in the training bay began blaring as sensors detected the medical emergency, and automated systems started calling for Dr. Veltara and the emergency medical team. James looked down at his bleeding arm, then up at the circle of panicked aliens surrounding him. The cut stung quite a bit, and blood was still seeping through the piece of uniform he had pressed against it, but he felt perfectly fine otherwise. Hey, does anyone have a first aid kit around here? He asked in a calm voice, applying more pressure to the wound with his right hand. Or maybe just a clean bandage and some antiseptic. The alien students stared at him in complete silence. Even the emergency alarms seemed to fade into the background as dozens of eyes, sensors, and other sensory organs focused on James with expressions of pure shock. Kira's mouth opened and closed several times before any sound came out. A bandage, she whispered, her translator barely managing to process the words. But James, you are bleeding everywhere. Your vital fluids are pouring out. Yeah, it looks pretty messy, James agreed, glancing at the small puddle of blood on the floor. But it is really not that serious. Head wounds and arm cuts always bleed a lot because there are so many blood vessels near the surface. Makes it look worse than it actually is. Borak's antennas stopped their frantic twitching. You are not dying. Dying? James looked genuinely surprised. From this little scratch? No, definitely not dying. I might need a few stitches if it does not stop bleeding soon, but it is nowhere near dangerous. Nim's gaseous form flickered between colors as she tried to process this information. But the blood loss, surely your organs are failing by now. James chuckled, which made several students step back in alarm. My organs are fine. Humans can lose about 15% of our blood volume before we start having real problems. This is maybe 2% at most. He looked around at their worried faces. Has anyone actually seen a first aid kit in this room? Before anyone could answer, the training bay doors burst open and Dr. Veltara rushed in, her crystalline body blazing with emergency light patterns. Behind her came two medical assistants carrying advanced life support equipment, ready to deal with what the automated systems had reported as a critical trauma situation. Where is the patient? Dr. Veltara demanded, scanning the room with her sensors. The emergency systems detected massive fluid loss and, she stopped mid-sentence when she saw James sitting calmly on a supply crate, still holding pressure on his arm. Oh, hi Dr. Veltara, James said with a small wave of his uninjured hand. Sorry about all the fuss. I had a little accident with some sharp metal, but it is nothing serious. Do you happen to have a bandage? The doctor's light patterns shifted to what James had learned was confusion. She approached slowly, her senses examining him from multiple angles. You are conscious. Your vital signs are stable. Your brain function appears normal. Of course they are, James said. Why would they not be? Dr. Veltara looked at the blood on the floor, then at James's cut, then back at the crowd of stunned students. The amount of fluid you have lost, it should have put you in shock by now. Your circulatory system should be failing. James carefully peeled back the cloth from his wound to show her. See? It is already starting to clot on its own. Human blood does that automatically when we get cut. And our hearts just pump a little faster to make up for what we lose. As if to demonstrate, he checked his pulse. Yep, about 90 beats per minute. Little elevated, but nothing dangerous. One of the medical assistants, a being that looked like a walking tree, leaned in closer. This is impossible. No species can function normally after losing this much vital fluid. Well, humans can, James said matter-of-factly. We are actually pretty good at dealing with injuries. Our ancestors had to survive in a world full of predators and sharp objects, so we evolved to keep going even when hurt. Kira finally found her voice again. But you could have died. James shook his head. Not from this. Now, if I had cut an artery, that would be different. Or if the metal had gone deeper and hit bone or tendons. But this is just a surface wound through muscle and skin. Dr. Veltara was scanning him continuously, clearly struggling to understand how he was still conscious and talking. Your species can truly function with this level of trauma. This is not trauma, James corrected gently. This is what we would call a minor injury. Maybe a 6 out of 10 on our pain scale. He paused, thinking. Actually, I once saw a human farmer continue working for 3 hours with a nail through his foot. Only went to the hospital when his wife found out and made him go. The alien students exchanged looks of amazement and disbelief. What about broken bones? Asked Borak, his voice full of curiosity now instead of panic. People walk on broken legs sometimes, James said. Not recommended, but it happens. Especially if adrenaline is involved. Adrenaline? Dr. Veltara asked. It is a chemical our bodies make when we are stressed or scared. Makes us stronger and blocks pain for a while. Very useful in emergencies. The doctor made rapid notes on her data pad. Fascinating. We must study this further. She gestured to one of her assistants. Please bring a standard medical kit. Let us treat Mr. Thompson's injury properly. As the assistant hurried away, James smiled at his classmates. So, anyone want to learn some basic human first aid while we wait? Within 2 hours, news of the impossible human had spread throughout every level of the Galactic Medical Academy. James found himself sitting in the main lecture hall, his freshly bandaged arm resting on the podium, while nearly 300 alien medical professionals packed the seats to capacity. Dr. Veltara stood beside him, her crystalline form still flickering with fascination. Ladies, gentlemen, and various other beings, she announced, today we witness something that challenges everything we thought we knew about trauma medicine. In the front row, Kira sat with her notebook ready, still looking shaken from the morning's events. Borak had positioned himself nearby, his compound eyes focused intently on James. Even Nim had found a way to compress her gaseous form into a smaller container so more students could fit in the room. James, Dr. Veltara said, would you mind explaining to our colleagues how you remained conscious after losing so much blood? James stood up, feeling slightly overwhelmed by all the attention. Well, like I said before, it really was not that much blood. Human bodies are designed to handle injuries like this. He gestured to his bandaged arm. We have about 5 liters of blood in our bodies. I probably lost maybe 100 milliliters, which is less than half a cup. A professor from the advanced xenobiology department raised what appeared to be a tentacle. But surely even small amounts of fluid loss would affect brain function. Not really, James replied. Our brains get priority blood flow. The body automatically redirects blood from less critical areas to keep the brain and other vital organs working. That is why people sometimes get pale when they are injured, the blood is being moved away from the skin. Dr. Veltara activated a holographic display showing human anatomy. What other injuries can your species survive? James thought for a moment. Well, broken bones are pretty common. I broke my arm twice as a kid, and my leg once playing sports. Kept playing for 20 minutes after the leg break, actually, until the coach made me sit down. The audience made various sounds of amazement and disbelief. What about internal injuries? Asked a student from the back. Humans have survived pretty incredible things, James said. There was a construction worker who had a metal rod go completely through his brain, and he lived for years afterward. People have survived being stabbed through the heart, having their intestines damaged, even losing entire limbs. A professor who looked like a giant butterfly fluttered her wings nervously. How is this possible? What makes humans so durable? James smiled. I think it is because Earth was a really dangerous place when we were evolving. We had to survive attacks from large predators, falls from high places, cuts from sharp rocks and plants. The humans who could keep going even when hurt were the ones who lived long enough to have children. Dr. Veltara nodded thoughtfully. So your species developed redundant systems and high pain tolerance as survival mechanisms. Exactly, James said. Plus, we heal pretty fast. This cut should be mostly healed in a week or 2. Broken bones take about 6 weeks to mend completely. Kira raised her hand tentatively. James, what about the chemicals you mentioned? This adrenaline? Oh right, James said, getting excited about the topic. When humans are in danger or very stressed, our bodies release adrenaline and other chemicals. They make us stronger, faster, and less sensitive to pain. People have lifted cars off trapped victims, run incredible distances, or fought off attackers much larger than themselves. The room buzzed with conversation as the aliens discussed this information among themselves. There was one case, James continued, where a mother lifted a car that was pinning her child. The car weighed over a ton, but the adrenaline gave her enough strength to move it. Borak clicked excitedly. So humans become stronger when threatened. Temporarily, yes. And we can ignore almost any pain when we have to. Soldiers have continued fighting with bullets in them, explorers have walked for days with broken bones, and athletes have finished competitions with serious injuries. A senior professor in the back stood up. Are there any limits to this resilience? James nodded seriously. Of course. We can still die from major injuries, blood loss, or infections. And the pain tolerance has limits too. But compared to what I am learning about other species, humans seem to be unusually good at surviving trauma. Dr. Veltara made more notes. This explains some of the historical accounts we have received from human space explorers. Stories that seemed exaggerated now appear to be accurate. What kind of stories? James asked curiously. Reports of humans continuing to function after injuries that would have killed most other species. Humans working in environments that should have been fatal. Humans recovering from medical conditions that we consider hopeless. The doctor's glow brightened. We had assumed these were exaggerations or translation errors. James laughed. Probably not. Humans are pretty stubborn about staying alive. As the lecture continued, James found himself answering dozens of questions about human physiology, pain management, and recovery processes. The alien medical professionals took extensive notes, clearly realizing they needed to completely revise their understanding of human biology. By the end of the session, Dr. Veltara had announced plans to update all medical protocols involving humans, and several professors had requested permission to study human resilience more closely. Perhaps, she said to James as the crowd dispersed, your people are not as fragile as we assumed. 8 months later, James stood at the graduation podium of the Galactic Medical Academy, looking out at a sea of alien faces that had become familiar friends. The Crystal of Excellence gleamed in his hands, a beautiful award that Dr. Veltara had just presented to him for finishing first in his class. When James Thompson arrived at our academy, Dr. Veltara announced to the packed auditorium, we thought we were accepting a fragile species that would need constant protection. Instead, he has taught us that strength comes in many different forms. James smiled as he saw his friends in the audience. Kira sat in the front row, her aquatic mobility chair decorated with congratulatory ribbons from her homeworld. She had already accepted a position at the Frontier Medical Station, specifically requesting to work with human patients who might arrive there. Borak was in the third row, his compound eyes reflecting the stage lights proudly. He had decided to return to his home planet to open the first human-compatible medical clinic in his entire star system. The insectoid being had become fascinated with human physiology after that first day in the training bay. Nim floated near the back, her gaseous form glowing a happy blue-green color. She had already published 3 research papers about what she called the human paradox, how a species could appear fragile yet prove nearly impossible to stop once injured. The ceremony continued with other awards and speeches, but James found his mind wandering back to that day in the simulation chamber. Such a simple accident, a cut on his arm that any human would have treated with basic first aid. Yet it had changed everything. After the ceremony, Dr. Veltara approached him backstage. James, I wanted to give you this personally. She handed him a data pad containing his final thesis, Interspecies Trauma Response Protocols, A Human Perspective. Thank you, James said, reading through the document. It is hard to believe this all started because I needed a bandage. The doctor's crystalline form flickered with amusement. That simple request revolutionized our entire medical database. Your thesis has already been adopted by medical facilities in 12 different star systems. It was true. James's research had led to complete updates of emergency protocols involving humans. Medical stations across the galaxy now understood that humans could function with injuries that would be immediately fatal to most other species. The old handle with extreme care warnings had been replaced with approach with caution but do not assume immediate medical intervention required. The most interesting part, Dr. Veltara continued, is how your classmates have spread this knowledge. They are becoming ambassadors for human resilience throughout the galaxy. James nodded. He had received messages from Kira describing her work with human colonists who had survived ship crashes that should have killed everyone aboard. Borak had sent reports about humans who had walked into his clinic with injuries that had his staff preparing funeral rites, only to discover the patients just wanted some pain medication and a few stitches. The stories are already becoming legendary, the doctor said. There is one about a human cargo pilot who continued flying for 3 hours with a broken rib and internal bleeding, just to deliver medical supplies to a plague-stricken colony. That sounds about right, James said with a grin. Humans can be pretty determined when lives are at stake. As James prepared to board the transport ship back to Earth, he reflected on how much had changed. When he first arrived at the Academy, other species saw humans as the newest and most delicate members of the galactic community. They treated them like expensive glass that might shatter at any moment. Now, medical professionals throughout known space were learning that humans were more like flexible steel. They might bend under pressure, but they rarely broke completely. And when they did break, they had an annoying habit of continuing to function anyway. The transport ship's captain, a tall being with blue skin and 4 arms, greeted James as he boarded. "You are the famous human medical graduate, yes? The one who survived the Great Bleeding." James laughed. "It really was not that much blood, but yes, that is me. My crew has heard the stories," the captain said excitedly. "Is it true that humans can lose entire limbs and still fight?" "Well, not for very long," James replied. "But longer than most species, I suppose." As the ship departed the station, James looked out the viewport at the stars. Somewhere out there, his former classmates were sharing what they had learned about human nature. Stories were spreading from medical station to research facility, from one species to another. The galaxy was beginning to understand that the newest members of the interstellar community were not the fragile newcomers they appeared to be. They were survivors who had earned their way to the stars through sheer stubborn determination and an impressive ability to keep going when everything went wrong. James smiled as he imagined the conversations happening across the galaxy. Alien medical teams would no longer panic when they encountered an injured human. Instead of preparing for immediate death, they would probably just ask the same question James had asked that day in the training chamber. "Do you need a bandage?" And knowing humans, the answer would probably be yes, that would be enough.